Welcome to the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast with me, Dave Roberts. This is the podcast that talks with tech leaders from across the industry, exploring their insights, sharing their experiences, and offering valuable advice to help technology professionals. The podcast also explores technology innovations and the evolving tech landscape, providing listeners with actionable guidance and inspiration. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Richard Savoy to the show. Richard is a patent-holding executive, engineer, co-founder, and CEO of Adiona Tech, one of the most exciting AI-powered delivery route optimization platforms out there right now. Adiona is currently powering millions of deliveries for global heavyweights like Coca-Cola, Amazon, and Marley Spoon. So welcome to the show, Rich, and I can't wait to hear more about your journey and what lies ahead for sustainable transport solutions.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you.
So Rich, you founded multiple tech ventures, from non-profit to thriving engineer communities. What key lessons have you learned about leadership and innovation along the way?
I think the thing that stands out with all of the ventures that I've done, and something that I definitely didn't understand along the way, was this concept of leading with purpose, having a clear vision for what it is that you want to achieve. And you don't necessarily need to know how you're going to achieve it at first. Maybe that's something that you build the plane as you fly it. But when you're building the plane as you fly it, you need to know what direction you're going. You need to know where you want to land. And I think that's been a key lesson that has, again, as that's become more clear in all of the ventures, it catalyzes everyone around you. It screens out people who aren't on the same mission, and that's fine. They will have a different mission and they will be happy somewhere else. But it screens in the people that are going to maximize your ability to get where you're going. And I think another thing that has been very important in my journey, and maybe something that people will relate to, is, there's an adage about hiring people that are smarter than you. I think that's an oversimplified way of saying hire people that are complementary to you. I've seen many ventures where there's not enough diversity of not just skills, but capabilities and opinions, and ways of doing things. And you really need diversity on a team. So, you want to hire people that are smart. You want to bring them in on the journey and the same mission. You want to make sure that they're supported and capable, and you want to make sure that they have the flexibility to do all of the difficult things that starting a new venture requires.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Creating the right culture within a business and with that right level of diversity is the key ingredients. So what inspired you to focus on AI and urban mobility, and how have your different ventures shaped your approach?
It's a long story that I'll try to give you the most entertaining version of, which is my background is in electrical engineering and medical devices. So totally different than what AI and urban mobility. But I decided I wanted to start my own venture. I felt I was at a point in life where I needed a new project and I needed something that was a little different. And as an engineer, I had a list of bad ideas and hopefully was going to find one or two that were good, and started workshopping them. And one of them came out from this, the story of my sister, really, back in the US in Boston. She would commute past 3 grocery stores of the same chain as the one that she worked at. So imagine, going past 3 Tesco's to go and work at a Tesco, and why not work at one closer? So I kind of got a bit obsessed with geolocation and workplace mobility and all these concepts that are important when we think about our transport networks and our road networks and congestion and waste and emissions. It's a very complicated topic that any urban designer and transport planner will talk about at length. Long story short, the concepts we came up around workforce efficiency and commute minimization and things weren't really feasible in the current kind of human resources software stack. So we were very lucky that we got some introductions to some transport and logistics companies through that journey. And they said, well, come and have a look at our transport systems and the way that we organize our delivery fleets. And you'll see that there's a massive inefficiency there. And you've got all these diesel trucks that are burning way more fuel than they need to and running 40% empty in a lot of modern economies, like in the UK and in Australia and the US. And the software systems that have been built to optimize them just really aren't fit for purpose. And we realized that that was an opportunity to solve a very difficult, intractable problem that required hardcore mathematics, and that's where AI can be extremely helpful from a technological perspective, and create a win for what we call a triple win: financial efficiency and improvements for those fleets and those companies, reduction of emissions that benefits us all. That's always going to be a net win for us. And it's also a very cost-effective way of abating emissions. And then finally, ethical AI that helps people in their jobs and augments them rather than replacing them. Because again, out in the physical world, we want to improve the life of the truck driver, the delivery driver, the warehouse worker, people that are actually doing this work in the physical world and the backbone of the modern economy, which is supply chain. How do we make their lives better using AI? So those three things were became our North Star and how we ended up in this space.
Well, that's fantastic. So, what are some of the most practical challenges you see cities and companies facing when integrating AI into urban mobility solutions?
Well, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out is still true. It's about getting access to good quality data that you need. And oftentimes that comes from sensors, so GPS modules on trucks or in cities. There's all sorts of sensors that you can use and data feeds that you can use, traffic feeds, things like that. So getting access to that has been an evolving thing over the last 20 years, from the emergence of GPS as a publicly available thing, then to add more data to the mix, again, like traffic on the road network and things, really key to what we do. Hard to get that data, but it's becoming easier, and we are working with some really clever companies around the world that have unique access to data from automobiles and things that give us the data we need. I'd say another big challenge that when we talk about the cities, it's change management and dealing with the bureaucratic legacy of a lot of the way that cities operate. It's very difficult to change things and requires a lot of stakeholders to buy in and be satisfied in different ways. That's just always going to be difficult, especially with something like AI, where there's a risk profile and they need to really be comfortable with the risk profile. They need to really trust the vendors that are supplying them AI. So anytime you're working with government on anything IT related, you're going to have to navigate those hurdles, and it's going to slow you down and become difficult. And in mobility, it's no different. So I think those are some of the more practical things: are data, and then just dealing with legacy systems.
And staying on that point of AI, how can AI help large fleets balance sustainability goals with the realities of operational efficiency?
Well, it's one of the things I talk about a lot is that the transport industry wholly is the second biggest emitting industry globally. So there's an enormous amount of emissions that come from transport just because the burnt fuel. But of that transport industry, road freight and road travel is the biggest component. It's much bigger than air travel. It's much bigger than sea travel. So the amount of emissions that we see, the lion's share comes from vehicles with wheels. And of that, we see that commercial fleets have longer running times. They're on the road longer. They do more kilometers. They do more miles. They burn more fuel. Their utilization is much higher than a passenger car. So again, we've got this ability to focus on some low-hanging fruit in that commercial road transport space. But as you say, it's got to be a balance because you can't sacrifice the business goals and requirements and the operational constraints of a business in order to improve the sustainability. And that's always a delicate balance. I like to say that sometimes what we do is a sustainability Trojan horse. We actually help these organizations, our customers, like Australia Post, like Coca-Cola, like PepsiCo, big fleets carrying enormous amounts of product and items and goods. We help them become more financially efficient, and our focus is really on improving their margins. But the side effect of that, and why I call it a Trojan horse, is anytime you're able to create an efficiency for a fleet, like say, for instance, with our first work with Coca-Cola, we were able to take one of their delivery fleets and reduce the total on-road delivery time, the time that they were spending driving, by 48%, and the total amount of distance, kilometers, miles, by 36%. So it effectively reduced their emissions by 36%. The financial benefit is that they were able to get rid of 15 trucks. So straight off the top, they're going to achieve this enormous financial benefit of removing trucks from their fleet that they don't need anymore because they're more optimized. And then we get the sustainability benefit of the emissions that we avoid because of that. So really that's where we specialize in helping them balance their business goals, their financial constraints, and then getting a net sustainability benefit out of it.
Well, that's fantastic to hear because, as you know, Rich, many leaders feel that sustainability initiatives and cost savings are at odds with each other. So, based on what you've been saying, how can technology help break that perception?
An interesting lesson that we learned along the way is when we started, it was more about daily optimization. So you've got a number of vehicles, they've got to go out, deliver product, and you give them an optimized route. And that's where the main focus of our industry tends to be. But what we realized is that there's a few levels up that you can start to address that question. You can address that balance between cost savings versus sustainability and bring them onto the same team by simulating, by creating a digital twin and then experimenting. So I'll give you an example. There's a lot of fleets that we work with that want to experiment with electric vehicles and other types of low emissions vehicles like hydrogen powertrains and things like that. But let's just stick with electric vehicles for the example. And we worked with a large telco company here in Australia, very large, and they had depots around the country, and they're sending out project materials for all of the the fiber optic network and internet stations and data backbone stations and things around the country. Very expensive equipment going all over the place. And as you know, Australia is a very large continent. It's about the same size as the continental US. So enormous amounts of distance traveled and all that. And what we showed them is that in the simulation environment, they could run different types of simulations to show, well, what if we delivered all of these products with a different fleet? What if we transitioned some of the higher volume areas from, kind of ad hoc delivery to more of a milk run delivery? So there was this, ability to bundle things and consolidate the shipments better into those areas where they're going to do a milk run and experiment and play in that data environment. Totally isolated, not real, but giving them then the numbers and the KPIs to measure the impact, both financially and sustainability. And that was really exciting because it also identified some low-hanging fruit areas that they could transition shorter range routes and milk runs to an electric vehicle from a diesel and giving them a further savings benefit and emissions benefit. And so a lot of the worry and the stress and the risk about making changes in the network can be allayed by allowing them to simulate and experiment first before standing up a giant business case and a very expensive proof of concept. And I think that's one of the ways that we're really addressing the sustainability versus cost question.
Well, that's excellent. Now, you mentioned KPIs there. What metrics or data points should fleet operators be tracking to truly measure progress on both efficiency and sustainability?
That's a great question. And it does vary a little bit from organization to organization, but a lot of this is becoming more regulated. And so I don't have to actually make up which which metrics and data points for sustainability because a lot of times those are mandated. And the global framework that's come out of Europe is around this concept of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so scope 1 emissions are emissions that your organization creates directly. So if you own some vehicles and you're going out and doing deliveries, that petrol that you burn and the emissions you created are yours in scope 1. Scope 2 tends to be the electricity that you consume. So you consume it on your site, but it's provided by an energy company that makes it somewhere else. And so scope 2 is that. And then scope 3 is everything else. And so if I'm a manufacturer, if I'm, say a Coca-Cola and I'm outsourcing some of my deliveries to another fleet, a specialist transport company or whatnot, that's scope 3 emissions that I'm still on the hook to report. So now there's this requirement that I need to go to my suppliers, my transporters, my raw materials providers, everybody, and collect up all of this emissions data to create a scope 3 emissions report. So that's really the core sustainability metric is what kind of emissions do you create? And then where do you create them from that scope 1, 2, and 3 framework context? Then, as you mentioned, for the efficiency side of things, that's really simple. It tends to be distance, time, and labor spend. And those things, because when you look at the cost of delivering a product, it's the vehicle cost, the labor spend, the kilometers driven all relate to the fuel, and those are your top 3 costs when it comes to a delivery operation. So pretty straightforward.
So, when you're talking with fleet operators, how do you keep technical discussions approachable and engaging for perhaps a non technical audience?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's always this mix in a big organization of effectively operational people who are worried about the product getting to where it needs to be on time. That's how they get paid. And IT people and technical data people who work in the organization just to keep the organization running and make sure that the IT systems are humming along and not breaking. And so they actually have sometimes competing priorities. And that's where stories and examples and bringing them on a journey can be so powerful. Oftentimes being able to not dive deep straight away into the technical specs of a product and what it does, but more tell stories about how other companies or even their competitors have achieved an outcome or delighted a customer or improved their bottom line or reduced the amount of money they spend on carbon credits to reach their net zero goals. So there's many different ways that you can approach talking to technical and non-technical people at the same time to bring them onto the journey using that power of stories. And I think they need to be relatable. You need to fine tune them and adapt them to your specific audience. That's very important. And then another important piece of that is visualization. Using the power of your eyes along with a story to really capture a moment and capture even a feeling. I know, which sounds kind of crazy when you're talking about B2B enterprise, but you really do want to leave these people with a feeling that they're going to do something really important.
So, switching gears to the community of engineers that you work with, how do you tend to foster collaboration and share ideas in a way that really drives innovation?
Well, yeah, when you mentioned the community of engineers, one of the ventures I started in the early days of LinkedIn, I was an early LinkedIn adopter, and I thought it was going to be a big platform, and I wanted to start a LinkedIn group specifically because there were so many engineers always looking for components, looking for gear, looking for, as an electrical engineer, I was always looking for some new gear for my own personal garage lab, like some power supplies or some soldering equipment and things like that. And so I thought LinkedIn would be a really interesting place to experiment with that. And so what I created was a group called Engineers Looking for Stuff, and I have the beauty of the acronym ELFs for that. And so the ELFs group was really about empowering these engineers from all over the world using LinkedIn to get together and share their equipment and their resources. And it became much more than the sum of its parts because people started getting involved in each other's projects. It became much more about, oh, this is a passion project that I'm doing. I want to build this particular thing. And then you have this instant access to a community of like-minded people with technical skills that can then give you ideas and input and how to do that. Now, I think other formats, other forums since then have probably become better than LinkedIn to do that. But I think what I learned from it, and I bring to all of the companies that I work with and my companies, is that open sharing is key. That when you stop hearing voices, that people don't feel safe in sharing things, and that's a bad thing in any organization. You want people sharing even the bad ideas because it means at least that they trust that they can be heard and they're willing to contribute. And so that's really important, is that safety to share openly and reward people that are curious about things with your time and attention. I think that's really important too. I was just on an interview earlier today, and one of the candidates was so fascinating and compelling to me. And this is a software developer, software engineer. So compelling to me because he was just so insanely curious that you could feel the curiosity, just leaching from him in every way, shape, and form. And I find that just to be such a compelling way to engage people, is by asking them questions and being curious. And so, that combination of encouraging sharing, rewarding curiosity, and then having a either physical or virtual space for people to interact and benefit from those.
And that goes back to what we were talking about before about the right culture within an organization. So, what role does mentorship play in scaling leadership impact in tech driven sectors like mobility?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of benefits to mentorship. I think some of the key ones, especially when you are talking about leadership impact, like how do you enable someone to start to become a more effective leader, it's about making sure that you're revisiting the lessons that you learn. And that's something that I did really poorly earlier in my career, and growingly, increasingly placed more of a prize on as I grew, making sure you do the postmortems for what worked and what didn't work, making sure that you understand why your failures were failures and why your successes were successes. And then, from a mentorship perspective, allowing people to be really open and accepting about what worked and what didn't. And I think that's important because it creates like a multiplier effect for their growth. It's a compound effect when you're trying your best and somebody's giving you feedback, but they're giving you really objective, open feedback about what's working, what's not, and then giving you ideas on how to fix it. Not necessarily fixing it for you, because that's not mentorship. That's just doing the work. Mentorship is about just giving that objective feedback and allowing them to feel safe with that, and then come up with their own ideas on how to improve it and change it and iterate. So I think that's, for me, my mentors, the best mentors I've ever had, have been the ones who've asked a lot of questions and helped me explore the curly edges of problems and solve them myself, and given lots of feedback in order to do that. That's where I think you get that compound multiplier effect for growth. And the rest of the team benefits from it as well. And so if you mentor every individual on the team in that same way, they will all benefit from it and talk to each other. And also it becomes this, ability to almost like they co-mentor each other on a team, which is always amazing to see.
I agree. Co-mentoring is so important, and it's something that I've talked about previously on this podcast. So looking at the tech landscape and how it's evolving at such a rapid rate, what do you think urban mobility will look like in perhaps 5 to 10 years from now if AI continues at its current pace?
Well, I'm very excited about autonomous vehicles. I have been, and it feels like we're getting much closer with Tesla and the robotaxi and some of the other organizations, where at least it's going to start to get more adoption in certain areas. Even here in Australia, there's been some pretty successful pilots, and that's going to absolutely change the landscape for congestion and road network usage. It's going to throw a bit of a grenade into a lot of urban planning, but that's okay. It's a good thing. It's a net win, I think. And I think also there's applications that people don't talk about quite as much, which is the application of AI in public transport. So, we're not a public transport modeling company, but we do work with a lot of those people. And if you can imagine using AI to have adaptive transport schedules that can automatically recalibrate and maintain efficiency while also increasing service levels, these are the types of outcomes that you get from using agentic AI in other areas. And if we apply them to mobility in the transport network, we're going to see some amazing outcomes. Now that will take time. I'm not even sure that will happen within 10 years, just because, again, we go back to the question from before about the problems working with government and change agency inside of governments. Again, anything related to the public good on public road networks and transport is going to take time. But one thing I'm really excited about in our space that I think is coming very, very soon and we're working on is agentic AI in commercial delivery. And so, for example, we were working with a company operating in a cold climate and piloting how to use agentic AI to solve problems when there's weather events. So effectively, snowstorms happening and they're delivering all sorts of different items, but the snowstorm disrupts the transport network. AI actually can make decisions not just about how to keep things efficient and optimal, but also you can give it targets and constraints. So in this case, for instance, it was about how does that company maximize their margin on a disrupted day to lose the least money from the disruption. And you can imagine how powerful that would be for a company who effectively is going to lose a lot of money when they can't deliver product on a disrupted day like that. Having an AI tool that can automatically run the numbers dynamically as conditions are changing and as deliveries are being made and new orders are coming in to maximize the revenue and reduce the disruption. I think those are the types of changes that we're seeing are going to be feasible in the next couple of years.
That's incredible. You mentioned agentic AI. Are there any other emerging technologies you believe will have a dramatic change on how fleets operate in the next decade?
Well, there is a lot happening in the electric vehicle space related to vehicle to grid systems. I don't know if you've heard much about that, but the ability to use your car and a delivery vehicle as basically a mobile battery. So in a place like Australia or in the Mediterranean where you have a lot of solar energy, you can literally be recouping energy as you go. And when you plug it back into the charger at night, you can deploy your energy back to the grid at a premium cost while the prices are high, and then you can leave it there and charge later at night when prices drop. So you imagine at scale this arbitrage of the pricing system of the grid, where AI is helping your organization effectively make money from the energy that you have in your vehicles rather than spend money to charge them. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I don't have any defined predictions because it's still a bit early. But when you combine that hardware, battery capability, and AI to do the arbitrage, it's going to be really, really interesting. And I think the other thing that will change how fleets operate specifically is around maintenance. There's a lot of downtime in commercial fleets. They do spend a lot of time on the road and they break down. And even EVs, they need tires and they need brakes and things like that. And it's a huge cost to the industry. So I think being able to move to adaptive, AI-driven predictive maintenance is going to drive a massive benefit in fleets and save them a lot of money.
So, what's the best piece of advice that you've received as a founder that you think every tech leader should know about?
So many things that have been important along the way, but trying to keep it on brand, I think that the best single piece of advice is to not trust advice too easily. I know that sounds ridiculous as advice, but I think of it like a parent. Okay. When I started having kids, one of my friends who I greatly respect, he's an insanely smart guy. He has three kids. And he said to me almost as like a throwaway comment one time, he's like, don't trust advice from anybody with less than three kids. And when I thought about it, I realized, well, what he means is that, kids are so unique and they're so different, and what works for one won't necessarily work for the other. And I absolutely apply that same advice for startups and for technology leaders. Even if you're embedded in a big organization, I think it's very wise to take every piece of advice with a grain of salt. Because I've had some incredibly successful founders give me absolutely bogus advice. The reason being because their successful company was very, very different to the company that I was running and the problem that I particularly had. And so while they, assumed that they were a very smart person and were a very smart person and had a solution that they wanted to advise, it wasn't the right thing for the problem I was dealing with. And that's happened numerous times. And I see, unfortunately, people falling into that trap where they say, well, this very smart, successful person gave me some advice and told me that this is the way I should be approaching something. And I say, well, don't jump into that too quickly. People do it all the time. But again, if I'm going to limit it to one takeaway from this podcast for people as a piece of advice that starting their own venture is be very careful about the advice you take and qualify it against a quorum of different opinions. Collect a lot of data before you make a decision like that.
And that actually resonates with another conversation I was having with a guest recently about how when business cases are used between organizations, sometimes what works well in one organization doesn't actually work well in another organization. So if you could go back and give your younger self one bit of insight about innovation or leadership, what would that be?
I definitely agree with a lot of the lean startup methodology, which is to really focus on the problem. Don't worry about the solution too quickly. Focus on what the problem is and understand it intimately and spend time with the people. When we started working in mobility and logistics, I didn't have any domain experience. So one of the first things that I did was went to the warehouse of a potential customer or partner and spend a day there and then go out on a truck with the driver and spend an entire day on that truck. You have to really roll up your sleeves and focus and be obsessive about the problem. And only then will you design not necessarily the best solution, but a solution that has a fighting chance. Otherwise, most of the time, your solution won't have a fighting chance if you're not actively obsessed with the problem. It doesn't happen by luck. Luck is a product of effort and showing up. You have to show up. You have to buy the lottery ticket to be in the lotto. So focus on the problem, be obsessed with it, spend the time to get to know it, and then good things will start to happen. And your ideas on how to innovate around it. And especially, like you said, with innovation and or leadership, to be able to innovate and or lead people towards that problem, it's critical to really be obsessed with it. And it's just like I said earlier, I think your first question was around catalyzing people to be on the same mission, in terms of learning about leadership. If you want to catalyze people to be on that mission with you and you actually want to solve the problem, you have to understand it so well.
And if people wanted to learn more, Rich, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
The easiest way is just to Google Adiona Tech. So Adiona, Adiona. We got that name because she's the Roman goddess of the return journey. Just Google Adiona Tech, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. Richard Savoy. Feel free to look me up, reach out, connect, and look forward to having a chat.
Well, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for all those insights, Rich. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, so just wanted to thank you once again for being part of the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. It was a great experience.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. It actually does help. Leave a review and share it with your network. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in tech.